Thank you, everyone that has taken time to leave us a review, and for all of you that share our podcast to your social media week after week. I want to take a moment and read some of the reviews that we have recently received. One of, if not my favorite podcast, I have been so encouraged by so many of these ladies' stories. Absolutely love multiple episodes from the young ladies to the elders. I continually tell people they just have to listen to this podcast. Thankful for all the testimonies and nuggets that have helped me. Such an inspiring podcast for women. Every episode I've listened to has made me laugh, cry, feel so inspired to go after my dreams and calling. This podcast is so powerful. Whether you are going through what they are talking about or something similar, it has blessed me so much. Thank you for starting it and allowing God to guide you. This is a wonderful episode. I heard from the Lord today. I've been praying for my kids and asking God to show me how to pray for them. And now I know how to pray for them. Thank you for this episode. Every review left, comment shared, and message sent is truly what encourages us to keep this podcast going week after week. This community was created to bring encouragement to you, and you are giving it to others by sharing a podcast that has helped or blessed you. Let's continue encouraging one another together. Hello and welcome to the Unashamedly You podcast, a space to enlighten, encourage, and empower you to go out and unashamedly be who God is calling you to be. I am your host, Jamie Herndon. I pray you hear less of me and more of Him as you listen to today's episode. Let's grow together. I am excited to have an amazing lady on our podcast today to share her story with all of us. She has an incredible testimony, and I know that we're all going to be so blessed by hearing it. I've actually had her on my list to bring on the podcast for a while, and I'm just so glad that it worked out for her to join us today. Brandie Strain, welcome to the Unashamedly You podcast. Please take a moment and introduce yourself.
Okay, yeah. So just a little bit about my life now, because I'm going to share my life, my past life, I guess you would say, um, just a little bit. I married my childhood best friend, and he was my best friend. He was my childhood sweetheart. We started going to the same church together when I was just very young, and he became quickly the best friend that I could ever have. And he helped me throughout this whole entire journey. So, my whole story that I'm about to share, he was right there with me, being that help and that support to me. I have three beautiful children. I have Tucker, he is almost 13. Tyson, he's 10. And Taylor, she is 6. And she is the most dramatic kid you'll ever meet in your life. She's amazing, but I'm thankful for all my children. So we pastor a church in Brookhaven, Mississippi, Solid Rock Pentecostal Church. When we moved here, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. The people, they love us, they care for us. I am constantly showered with amazing gifts and food, and they cook for us all the time. I'm constantly getting vegetables and all kind of nice Southern treats. Before pastoring, we did evangelize for about 5 years, and that was a great experience. We met a lot of people along the way, a lot of forever friends, and I'm so thankful for those 5 years. It was really a blessing to me and my husband. When we first were married, we were married in McLean, Mississippi, and then we moved to Decatur for a little while after that. After Decatur is when we came to Brookhaven. And basically now we're just living our best life here, enjoying the people of God. So, yes, ma'am.
That's awesome. So you had two boys and then a girl.
Yes.
I'm the opposite. So I had two very dramatic girls, but then the boy came and he's the one that like really has rocked our world. He's 6.
Really? That's crazy. I wonder if it's the baby.
It's the baby, or I think a lot of parents have said it's kind of what you're used to. So like
Yeah.
I was raised with sisters. All of my cousins are girls. Like I've just been around all these girls. And then I was used to my girls and they're just dramatic. But I'm like, girls are dramatic, but they're dramatic in like one puddle. Like I know
Right. Yeah.
exactly where they are in this dramatic season.
Yeah.
Ezra is like all over the place and I'm being dramatic because I'm scared he's gonna like break his leg or something. He's just like, oh boy.
My boys, definitely all boys, but they were easy. They were super easy. Taylor, she's just something. You just have to meet her. She's something
Okay,
extra. So
maybe
yeah,
it's the baby because
it
yeah,
might be the baby. She's pretty rotten too. So
he
yeah.
is too. And I'm like, oh goodness, Matt's like, he's a boy. He needs to man up. I'm like, he is 5. Like, let's not talk about manning up yet.
Yeah, exactly. I understand that. Yeah.
Probably my fault.
No.
So I know that you have an incredible testimony of God's grace. You had mentioned that you were going to share that with us. Many people, I think they see our lives now and see how blessed we are and the life that we live. And we don't always see the past and what people have come from, where they've been. And a lot of times they don't realize, especially I've seen this with people, then they're getting in church or they're coming to God and they're like, well, everybody there's got it together. And I'm like, yeah, because that's what God can do. That's the power
Yeah. Amen.
of the Holy Ghost and the power of what God can do with a life and through a life. But that's not the case as far as everybody's not just had this perfect childhood and perfect story their whole lives. So can you share a little bit about that and how that you were raised?
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, I would like to say that is so true. People can look at someone. I mean, I found out about a person's stories before, and I'm like, just wow, like to know that they've went there and they've done that, or God's done this for them. You know, people don't understand, and they're like, well, why are you reaching this community? Why are you going out for these people? Why are you really putting extra time into that person? And I guess a lot of times I see myself in them, or I see, you know, my family stories in them. So that's very true. You can't just look at somebody and say they have it all together because you don't know their story. So just a little bit about myself. So I was born and raised in Lucedale, Mississippi. I was born into a very poor family. I was the youngest of two brothers. I have a brother that is 10 years older than me and a brother that is 12 years older than me. Um, my mom was addicted to prescription pills and my dad was an alcoholic. So my dad, he would go every single day to work at the shipyard in Pascagoula and he would come back. I remember I would sit on the couch. He would walk by, I would be watching TV. He would walk by, never say hello. How are you? How was your day? None of that. He would go straight to drinking. My mom, I don't ever remember her being home later in the afternoons. I think that she worked probably later shifts. Just my early memory. I remember never having dinner at the table with my dad. And I've thought that many times. I'm like, have I ever even sat down at a table and ate with my father or my brothers in that, and for that sense? I just never did do that as a child. It came to a point where life was just really, really rough from between my mom and my dad. And about age 6, 7, they ended up splitting and divorcing. My mom moved me to McLean. My brother stayed. And that was pretty intense too, to have our family just completely separated and split. But my mom moved me to McLean with her. And in McLean is where we met my stepfather. My mom and my stepfather got together. And I referred to him as Paul, Paw, in this. And I'll explain why later. But so when I talk about my stepfather, I'm referring to him as Paul. So she met my Paul and they got married. Eventually, we moved in together and he started taking me to church and my mom to church. In his household, it was totally different than being at my dad's. We were still very poor. We didn't have a whole lot then, but he brought something to the table that I had never had. He brought a structure. You know, we woke up, we went to school, we come home, we had supper together. It's like he taught my mom a different way of life because my mom was raised very poor as well and with very absent parents. She had 13 brothers and sisters. And when she was 13, she actually ended up leaving home. So she just had a rough childhood as well. But anyway, so with my stepdad, he really started investing into me in a way that I didn't realize until I got older, giving us stability. We had Christmas. There was never a birthday that was missed. In the past, my father, he never acknowledged my birthday or Christmas or anything like that. And this is going to sound crazy to say, but my dad was still my dad. Like I still loved him, even though he did not show me fatherly love. That's all I knew. I didn't know any better. So Anyways, well, once my stepfather started taking us to church, I quickly fell in love with the people of God. Like, you never underestimate the power of a Sunday school teacher because my Sunday school teachers, they changed my life. My youth leaders, they made us very involved. We were very involved in everything. We had fundraisers. We had Super Sunday before Super Sunday was even a thing. We had kids' church before it was even a big deal. Puppets and everything to get a child's attention, they did. But more than that, they loved on us. They cared for us. I was thinking back, and majority of the people in our church were first generation Pentecost. And all of my friends, their families were all split too. They were all, I don't know of anyone that had, other than of course, my pastor and his children, I don't know of anyone that had mom and dad that had stayed together and been together. Every family in my church were split. So our church, the community in our church that we had was to build on the brokenness. And so Brother Strain really invested into us. So I guess I began the journey of going back and forth between my mom and my dad. You have to split weekends. You have to go with them on weekends, go back to your mom, go to your dad, go to your mom. And that was probably the toughest because by this point I'm starting to love church. My dad is an alcoholic. When I go down there, he's shoving beer cans in my face. I probably started drinking alcohol whenever I was probably 2 or 3 years old. I don't know. I really can't remember the age, but he would just constantly give me alcohol. My brothers smoke, drugs. They were, from my earliest memory, they were in trouble with the law from the time they were about 12 years old. They went and broke into a store and vandalized a store and stole from a store. And so probably 12 and 14, they were already getting in trouble with the law. This time I was gone. But so I would go to my dad's and I would live this dark, horrible life. They would drink, we'd party, smoke, weed, police. It was just constantly drama. Then I would go back to my mom, and my mom, she was trying to live for God at this time. She was doing better with her prescription pills. My stepdad was really, truly helping her. The church was helping her. She ended up having another back surgery. That was the reason for her prescription pill problem, was she had a bad back injury, and she ended up having another surgery, and it just spiraled all way out of control. So there would be times, just for those who are listening that don't understand a prescription pill problem, the one that she had would be she would fall asleep, anywhere she was going. If she was driving, she's going to get drowsy and go to sleep. There was many times that I would pull the vehicle back off the side of the road as a child, just jerk the wheel just to get her back focused and pop her like, Mom, you're going off the road. There were times that we would go to church and I would watch her and she'd just be dozing off in church and falling over. One instance, we were at prayer meeting and nobody knew what was going on in my church. Like, I'm sure my pastor kind of picked up on it and my pastor's wife, but none of the kids knew what I was facing or what I was going through with my mom's addiction and the back and forth. And she ended up dying at prayer. She ended up falling out. They had to have a helicopter come and get her. They were able to save her. They sent her to basically the crazy house, is what I call it. But they sent her there for treatment to try to see if she can get better. She never really did. But then that kind of opened the can of worms for the whole church to know my problems. So all the kids were aware, what my mom's addiction was. It was very embarrassing. So after that, it just got worse with my mom and my stepdad's marriage. They began to fall apart. Let me insert this. I'm sorry. Whenever my mom married my stepdad, I gained 3 more sisters of his children. One of those sisters had a severe drug addiction, and her children, 18 months, probably 6, 7, 8 years old, we adopted them. My mom and my stepdad adopted them. So we were raising them. Anyways, so my stepdad, he tried to go off to work, do like not offshore, but like out of town working to get more money in. And while he was gone, my mom's addiction got way worse. It was bad every single day. I would come in, she'd be passed out on the table. One instance, she would be like literally laying in her cereal bowl. Like I'd have to like move her head. And it was just, I mean, I was probably 12, 13 years old at this time. By the time I was 14, my stepdad had enough and he come home. He come off the road working. He come home. Nothing was being paid for at home. She was using all of her money to buy pills, more pills, and more of her addiction. And our power got cut off. And I was away at camp, at church camp. And I'd come home and my mom met me outside of the house. And she says, get in the vehicle, we're leaving. And I'm like, we're leaving, where are we going, you know? And she just, you know, he's not paying the bills, the power's off, I'm not living here anymore. So she packs us up and leaves. She left my niece and my nephews. And I look back now and I'm like, man, that was so horrible because my niece, she was only at the time probably 3 or 4 years old, and they were 9, 10 years old. So it was like snatching their mom out of their life again because she had stepped up to be that parent. So she took us and she moved us to a FEMA trailer. I'm not sure if you know what that is or not. Like when Hurricane Katrina come through, they gave out government trailers to those who were affected by the storm. And so there was a FEMA trailer in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere, beside my dad's brother, my uncle. And when I say it was run down, it was like, it was number one, moving into the worst place ever. She forbid me to go to church. I was not allowed to go to church. And there was no food. I don't even know why she didn't even apply for food stamps or anything like that. She was waiting on her disability to come in. And so we were living in this little FEMA trailer. She moved me away from my church. She moved me away from my friends, my family that I had built up there in McLean. And it got worse, way worse. She ended up pretty much sleeping throughout the whole day. I would leave for school. I'd wake myself up for school. I'd go to school. She'd be passed out on the couch. I'd come back home. She'd be passed out on the couch. Very few times did I ever see her awake.
Share how far away this was that she moved you.
It was about 30 minutes, 25 to 30 minutes away. So it wasn't very far. It was close enough that a lot of people traveled from Lucedale, Mississippi to McLean. McLean was a little bitty town that had nothing, okay? 300 max people in the town, and we had a church of 100 people, you know? So people would drive from Lucedale to McLean, and she actually moved me really to a town called Bexley. We call it Lucedale, but anyways. So I'd wake myself up, go to school, come back, she'd still be on the couch. And this happened from, the summer. So this happened early in the summer, May, June, whenever camp is. And it continued for several weeks, me not being able to go to church. Eventually, I just started getting smart. I'm like, look, she's going to be passed out on the couch. I can go to church. I come back, she's not ever going to know that I'm even gone. So I called my youth leader, which she made the most lasting impact in my life as a child. She was the one that really showed me so much about living for God. And I called her. I said, hey, she come from Lucedale. She's one of the ones that come from Lucedale. She's like, I am not. She said, Wanda Jean will kill me if I come by there and get you. And I'm like, no, come get me. I promise she'll be asleep when we get back. She will never even know I'm gone. So I started sneaking out, going to church. My youth leader would come by and get me, and I'd come back. She'd never even know I was gone. I'd sneak in, go in there, and go to sleep. So that happened a few times that I was able to get out and go to church. Ultimately, she got her disability check, and that was a big relief because we were able to get out of that FEMA trailer where we were struggling to just make it. I mean, I went to school to eat lunch. That was my lunch and my supper. You know what I mean? I made breakfast. Back in those days, the teenage girls, they didn't want to eat what they had on their plate or whatever. I'm like, hey, you want to eat that? Because I'm like hungry over here, So I made breakfast and lunch. But anyway, so she got her disability check. She bought a little van. And to me, it was like, man, we're moving up in town. I'm like, I've got a van now. I have a vehicle because we didn't even have a vehicle. Whenever she moved us. Anyway, she ended up renting a older house, which was a nice house to me. I look back, it wasn't, but in my mind, I'm like, man, I've got a nice house now. She rented a nice home for us. And I thought, it's going to get better. She did kind of lay back off of her prescription problem for a little bit. And she would try to mostly do it at night. I'll never forget my pastor's daughter. Again, I wasn't allowed to see them. She had came by. She honked the horn and she's like, I was like, I was asleep in the room and I was like, what is she doing? It was a school night. And so I jumped up and my mom just so happened to be waking up out of like one of her sleeps and she was sober. And I'm like, Mom, Tab's here. And she's like, well, go see what she wants. So I walked outside and I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Like I'm shocked to see my pastor's daughter. And she's like, do you think your mom would let you go to town with me to finish up a project for school? And I'm like, on a school night, doubt it, you know? And I was like, why don't you go ask her? And I'm so shocked that she let me go. But now I look back and I see why. Anyway, so Tab came in. She's like, Sister Wanda, why don't you let Brandie go with me to town? She's got this bubbly personality. If you know my sister-in-law, she's just got this great personality. And my mother, she complied. She was like, yeah, absolutely. We go to town. I'll never forget, we go to Walmart and I'm feeling in this vehicle, I'm like, the peace of God again. I've been in this turmoil, and I'm here with her. She's blaring her gospel music. She's she's into her school. She's trying to get her schooling done, and she takes me back home. And before I get out of the vehicle, she's like, "Do you think your mom would let you stay with me tonight?" And I'm like, "On a school night? Absolutely not." I said, "But let's ask." So we went in there, and again, my mom was sober, and she she agreed. She said, "Yeah, that's fine as long as she's at school. She can't miss school." Just to backtrack a little bit, during this time, me and my mom to even go to church, like she had found out that I had been going to church, and then I had me and my husband, which was my boyfriend then, or not really my boyfriend, he was my friend then, my best friend at the time, and he had been communicating with me. And when my mom found out, she hit the roof and literally beat me. Like we got into a fist fight. And I remember like her choking me, like laying on top of me, choking me. And I could not disrespect my mom and hit her with my fist. I was hitting her with the palm of my hand just to try to get her off of me. So that just gives you a little bit of a how the scenario was, how very much so against me going to church she was. So, shocker, she lets me go to my pastor's house, stay the night that night. So, we get there, and again, I'm back into the peace of God. Like their home is so peaceful, and they're happy and they're joyful, and they're so glad to see me. And, you know, it was just, it was kind of like a wake up for me, like, man, like I miss this so much. So we go to sleep. Well, before we go to sleep, my pastor, he calls my mom and he tells her, he's like, Sister Wanda, it's time for you to get right with God. It's time to come back. You need to make things right. He's talking to her on the phone and I tell her good night. I love her. I go get in the bed. I'm in Tab's room and their house is kind of long. Her room's on one end and they have an office at the other end. And I had spent a lot of time at their house previously. So it was just like my home, to be honest. But middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. I just kept feeling like restless. I guess just being in this home again and just feeling overwhelmed with like, man, I'm missing the presence of God so much. I'm missing my church family, you know. So I go to their office and this is in the middle of the night. I just lay on the floor and I cry and I'm praying and I'm like, God, whatever you've got to do, get me out of this. I want to be back in the presence of God. I got to have your presence in my life. Like I want more than anything to live for you. And it eases. I get up, I go back, go to sleep. I wake up the next morning and my mother-in-law, not my mother, well, my mother-in-law, my pastor's wife then, she takes me to school and drops me off. And was right after lunch. I'm walking out of the bathroom. We're going to our next class after lunch. And I see like a group of people at the end of the hall by the office. And I see people that I know, and I'm like, what in the world, Because someone had come and got me, and they're like, hey, you're being checked out. So I was, walking out. And as I got closer to the office, there was probably 15, 20 people there that I knew. And it was all my family. It was my church family. And again, I had not seen them, in a while. I had not been really connected in the church. And then I see my youth leader. She sticks her head out and she gives me the fakest smile ever. I'll never forget her face. And then I see my pastor and my pastor's wife. And instantly I'm like, what's going on? And so I barely make it to the door. And all the doors, they swing the doors open, and my pastor puts his arms around me and he's like, Brandie, last night your mom, basically she died in the night. And I collapse. I just fall. And he grabs me before I hit the ground. He grabs me, he swoops me up, he carries me to his truck, and all the people, all the church family, they're around me and they're there by me, And I'm at that moment, when you lose somebody, I don't know if you've ever lost somebody that's close to you or not. When you lose somebody, you don't think of all the bad. In that moment, I didn't have flashes of the bad. I had more flashes of the good. I just seen like a film flashing before my eyes of all the good that my mom was in the time that she had. And so they take me to my aunt's house, and at my aunt's house, it was just, chaotic. People are there and people are crying, and they take me to the room, and person after person's coming in, and they're just, you know, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. There's no words for this. I'm 14 at the time. And so I have nowhere to go. I can't go back to my stepfather's. I can't go to my daddy's. And my youth leader, um, she, it wasn't even a question asked where I was going to her. I was going to her house. She took me in, and from there, I went from a very poor life to a very not rich life, but we had more than what anybody could ask for. I had I had all the name brand clothes, name brand shoes. We didn't have schedule there. So I went from, being kind of structured in my stepdad's home to like we got in bed whenever we wanted to. We never had supper. It was always fast food. She owned a very successful business in town. And so I had to get off the school bus. I had to go straight to work with her. She worked at a florist. She had a florist. And so it was always fast and go. I went on my first vacation with her. We had her husband wasn't in church, which was my first cousin. He was not in church. So she had a bit of a challenge, and she had a little girl named Allie and a little boy named Owen.
So she was a youth leader just by herself. It wasn't
Yes.
like as a
Yes,
team.
she
Okay.
was. So what we had in our church, because it was just a country church. We didn't have a youth pastor at the time. This is before Brother and Sister Hicks came to our church. And I'm about to explain about them as well. We just had a youth leader, and she really, I don't know if Brother Strain gave her that title or not. She just invested in us. She took us laser tagging. She took us bowling. She took us out. She got us out and about. She was the one that took us on our youth trips. You know, she just invested in us, and I guess we gave her the title youth leader. I don't know really how that happened, but she was. So her husband was not in church. So life was not easy for her, but he spent most of his time off. He worked off. And so we had a lot of time to ourselves without him, forcing us to have to do what worldly people would have to do. He did kind of make his children play ball. His daughter was in gymnastics and that kind of thing. So really, where it started there I started backsliding there, really, is basically what happened. I got into their lifestyle. She wasn't a strong Christian after a while. She started sliding back. We started letting things in, TV. We went to ball games. We would go on vacation and not dress the way that we should. We started doing the things that by this time I was probably 15, almost 16, and we just started letting things in. And her as my leader, man, she was absolutely amazing, strong at one time, and the devil just came in. So here I am as a teenager. I love God with all of my heart, and I truly wanted to please Him. But I had friends, we would go out and drink on the weekends, and I promise I'd come to those altars and I'd pray, I'm like, God, forgive me. Like I really did want to live for God. But in this house, it was complicated. It was very complicated. I can't explain to you everything. It was just the pull of the world. And she had sisters that were in the world, and we were constantly with them and with their children. And it was just Satan wanted to come in and destroy. And one breaking point for me was we had went to the beach, and another lady in our church was with us, and these two were both backsliding. They were both kind of out the door, my youth leader and the other lady. And it was my best friend at the time. Her daughter was my best friend at the time. And we watched movies on the way on our little portable DVD players. We blared country music. We got to the beach. We did our thing, wore inappropriate clothing. We got just a weekend full of sinful things, not a godly trip. And we got back. That was on like a Friday. We went for just the night. We came back. We went to church on Sunday morning. Sunday night, of course, conviction. I was feeling like, man, here I am, just I'm literally walking out the door on God is about where I was at. So Tuesday night rolls around and we have a family prayer at the church. And my friend, my best friend in the whole wide world, she just comes up to me and she says, hey, last night I snuck out and I met so and so. And it shook me. When I say it shook me, I mean, this is during the time that we didn't have social media. We didn't have all the things young people have these days. And that was still that was like next level. And it should be to this day, but it's not. But anyways, she tells me this and I'm like shook. I'm like, oh my word, what has she done? I'm next. I'm going to be the next one. Like, this is going to be me. I'm going to be that one person that walks out. So the next service was Wednesday night. And I go to the altar and I'm just like begging God, like, please forgive me. I don't want to live this way. And I have a come to Jesus meeting. I really do. And I'm like, I'm not going to live like this. So when I sit up for prayer, my pastor, he walks right in front of me. And immediately I say to him, I've got to talk to you. He's like, yeah, absolutely. So we go in his office and I wish I still to this day have never asked him what in the world I put him through, but I did. I put him through something horrible. So I get in there and I'm like, I can't go back. And he's like, what do you mean you can't go back? And I'm like, I'm not going back to her house. And the look on his face, I can still see it today. He's like staring at me like, what do you mean he's like, you have nowhere to go, like, where are you going to go? I mean, he didn't say that out loud, but I'm sure that's what he was thinking. And I just told him, I said, I can't live for God there. Like, I can't. Like, I'm struggling in my flesh majorly, and I won't go back. And he's like, okay, well, why don't you just go back tonight? We'll talk it out. Are you and her having problems? I'm like, no, I can't do it. He brings her in, and I'll never forget. She was so furious. And I felt so awful because still to this day, I never did tell Brother Strain what all we done. I didn't go in there to rat on her. It was more so I had to let him know that I can't live there. I'm struggling. I can't. And shortly after that, she just quit coming altogether. So from there, Brother Strain, he's amazing. He helped me tremendously And I didn't even realize this, but other people in our church had came to him and told him that I would always have a home, if I needed one. And so Brother and Sister Hicks were one of those people, and they were at the time our youth pastor and youth pastor's wife. And so they opened their home to me, and that was a challenge because I went from a very worldly atmosphere to a minister's home. And so all of my clothing, everything that I had was borderline short, tight, everything you could think of. It was not correct, especially for a minister's home. And so here I am, I'm moving into their home, and we moved into a trailer at the time, and it was a 3-bedroom trailer. And it was Brooke, me, Brody, and Braden. She had not had Briley at the time. She had Briley shortly thereafter. And so eventually she has Briley, and we have 5 kids in a 3-bedroom trailer and 2 adults, so 7 total. And in this home, she taught me a whole lot. She taught me a whole lot of structure. I went from public school to homeschool. We had chores, daily chores. We had supper every night. She was like the most frugal person I've ever met in my life. We would go to McDonald's, and she would get a large drink, probably maybe 2 large drinks. And we'd get everybody like cheeseburgers. And I think we probably split them all, to be honest. Like, she was so frugal. She taught me how to be so frugal. I was so thankful for that now. But anyways, finally we did move into a bigger home. But there in their home, I learned a lot about ministry. I learned a lot about being frugal. I learned about we had nightly prayer meetings. Brother Hicks would gather us all upstairs when we bought our house, and he would say, "Hey, it's time for prayer. Let's go pray." And they'd cut off all the lights, and we'd all be laid out all over the floor. And so they taught me a lot about prayer and about ministry and dressing godly. Like, I remember Brooke, I got so tickled thinking about it this morning. She would come up to me and she'd be like, "Are you really going to wear that?" I mean, I had just moved in their home, and I'm like, "I don't have anything else." She's like, "That is too tight," and I'm like, "I'm working on it. I am working on it." So anyways, but so they taught me a whole lot, and I'm so thankful for their time that I had in their home. I got married at 18, very young age. Ended up, obviously, me and my husband, my best friend. So we got married at 18, and pretty much shortly after, we was probably 20, 21 when we started evangelizing, and we were so young, and so many people opened their doors, so many churches. It was just amazing experience. God blessed us. We had amazing revivals. So we evangelized for about 5 years, and we came back to our church in McLean to assist his dad. And that was in like December, and by June of that following year, his dad resigned. Shook our world, but we moved from McLean to Decatur. And in Decatur, we were there for almost 5 years. But in that 5 years, this was in 2000, and I believe it was 2020. I was sitting on my couch, and I had received a message from a girl that I had knew in McLean. And I was like, "Well, what is she messaging me for?" She was several years younger than me. We went to school together, but I didn't really know her. I just had seen her, small town type thing. And she texts me, and she's like, "Hey, I just have something to tell you. I've got to get this off my chest." And I'm like, "Yeah, what's going on?" And she's like, "I have a secret about your mom that I feel like you should know, but I don't want to rip up everything that you've ever known about your life. I don't want to destroy everything that you've ever known about your life." And so instantly my interest is piqued, and I'm like, "What in the world is she talking about? Like, what does she know about my mom?" And so she proceeds to text me a picture of herself, and she says, "My dad told me before he died, her dad had just previously died that September. And she said that he had told her before he died that she has a sister. And she said it was me." I was like, "This girl has fell off a rocker," like, I'm like, "What is this girl talking about?" And so come to find out, she tells me this long story that my mom and my real dad had split up right before they divorced. Then they got back together. So before they divorced, when I was like 7, 8 years old, they had split up about 7 years before that. And my mom had got with This girl's daddy claims to this day that, you know, I am his daughter. So I'm like, in my mind, I'm like shook. I'm like, what in the world is she talking about? She sends me this picture, and I'm like, okay, we do look alike. That's kind of creepy. I sent it to my husband. I'm like, babe, look at this. She's saying that she's my sister, all this. Well, I'm like, can you get a DNA test? I had just taken a DNA test. I'm like, can you get a DNA test? And let's see if this is true. Like, if this is true, I would like to know. It didn't prepare me. Like, nothing prepared me for that moment. So, actually, January the 30th, the DNA test comes back and she FaceTimes me and she pops up on the screen and she's like, hey, sister. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like shook. I'm like, what in the world? Are you serious? And she's like, I'm very serious. She's like, you're my sister. So this whole time, I lived thinking that my dad was my dad. He's not even my dad. And I'm like, oh my word. So this is this is like a whole month that I was shaking uncontrollably for like days. Like my body was just like in shutdown mode. I'm like, how can this even happen? You feel like your life's a lie. You feel like you went through so much for no reason. I mean, brawls, how many fights I'd seen, how many times had been to the police department, how many times I had been to see my brothers in prison. Like so much is just I didn't have to possibly go through all of that. So she tells me, you are my sister. And not even a week later, that was on a Saturday, that next Friday, my dad was killed by a car. He was hit by a car on the highway. And I didn't have to tell him. My brothers still to this day, they don't even know. I have not told my brothers at all. And that that just was like another stab in the heart. It was like, man, like I'm thankful I'll never have to tell him. But at the same time, it's like, wow, like everything that I ever thought about my life is a lie. Like I thought my dad was my dad. And now I can't even meet my real dad. He's gone. He passed away that September. So it it really started to shake me. So my dad dies and I go to his funeral and I'm seeing my brothers. And this is just a week after finding out that they're really my half brothers and he's not even my dad. I'm planning his funeral. It's chaotic. You know, he was lost without God. He died an alcoholic. He died coming home from the beer store. So it was painful. It was very painful. So I get there, we go through the service, I go through the graveside, and my mom's eldest brother was there. And he walks up to me and he says, my mother-in-law standing beside me. I have some more people standing beside me. And he says, don't ever forget where you come from. And he said it in like a negative way. Like you said earlier, I'm blessed. You look at someone, you're like, man, they're blessed. Look at them now. Look at their life now. And he said it in a way like, you know, don't forget where you come from. You know, it was like pouring hot water all over me. I'm like, I'll never forget where I come from. I'll never forget the many dark nights. I'll never forget the loneliness. I'll never forget feeling hungry. I'll never forget feeling lonely without my dad, without my mom. I'll never forget what they brought me through. I'm still to this day, I'm 32 years old and I'm living consequences that are from the sin that they did when they were younger, the sins that my mother did when she was younger. I'm living that now. And my kids don't have a grandmom, a granddaddy on my side. There's no family reunion. There's no her coming to our Christmases. You know, I'll never forget what God has done for me. I'll never forget where God brought me from. And I'm super thankful. I'm super thankful for the blood of Jesus and the grace of God because that's why I'm here today.
This story is so good. You've got me crying. It is so true what you were saying about, not forgetting like how could you forget, at this point and what all that you've had to go through. Everything that you have talked about, what you went through, of course, obviously talking about, not being able to forget what you've come from and where you've been and the things that has happened to you and in your life. Talk to someone that maybe is in that situation where they feel like that there's no hope. They're at that crossroad. You know, in several parts of your story, you were explaining, and it was like you were at a crossroad, and it's like God gave you a chance to make the right turn again. And like he would bring you to a point in place and he would say, like now's your opportunity to decide and if you want to live for me and if you want to go this direction or if you don't. And all throughout your story, I'm seeing that. And there may be someone right now that's listening to this and they're like, I'm at that crossroads where I can either continue the life that I'm living, I can continue doing what I've been doing, or I can make that hard decision like you did whenever you went in your pastor's office and you said, I can't do it anymore. Talk to someone that may be at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. That was those moments were life-changing for me. If I had not had those moments where, I'm on the floor and I'm praying, I'm like, God, like whatever you have to do, get me out of this situation. And very well at that moment, my mom could have been taking her last breath. Who would have thought that my mom dying would have taken me on this long journey to where I am today? Like God taken something so special to me, the person that's supposed to be there to nurture you, and God gave me this way out. I would say to every young person that is struggling in their home life and their parents are not living for God the way that they should, or they have one parent in, one parent out, and they're having to go back and forth. Moving out is not always an option for some people, and you have to endure what you're in. I would say find a place in prayer that you can crucify your flesh and say, I'm not going to sin. From that moment forward, when I got up off that altar, I never drank another sip of alcohol from that moment forward. I knew in that moment when I got up, I'm going to live for God no matter what. And I feel like with all of my heart, even if I would have went back into her home, I would have been different from that moment. You know, you have to find a place in prayer. You have to listen to your pastor and have your pastor's voice in your life. And you have to have strong people that are there to encourage you and to help you and to lead you and guide you. If you have a strong support system, find somebody around you that can help you.
In your life, you talked about like just so many people that made the difference. I know one thing that really spoke to me was whenever you talked about that Sunday school teacher not thinking that you're not making a difference. There was a time in my life whenever it was my school teachers and our youth leaders, they would just say something or have an encouraging word or even sometimes getting you in trouble. I'm like, I'm glad that someone cares enough to tell me like this isn't right. This isn't what you're supposed to be doing. And
Yes.
even though sometimes, you may would feel a little bit resentment, like, who are they to tell me? But deep down, I'm like, man, thank God that they do care enough. What would you say to the people that God has put and placed in your life that are maybe doing some of those things now?
I would say don't think that that little preparation that you do throughout the week when you're studying your lesson, it's not in vain. When your kids walk in and you've had a rough week and you don't want to smile at them, you don't want to give them a hug, go ahead and give them that hug. Put your arms around them, tell them that you love them, that you believe in them. If you have those children that come in on your bus and they're wild and crazy, understand that the only love that they probably ever feel is whenever they're in your room, in your Sunday school room that day. Youth leaders who have those hard headed young people like me, who you see go to the altar and to the pastor's wife. You see them young people and that young lady go to the altar every single Sunday and she cries and boohoos and she gets back up and she doesn't dress the way that she should dress. And you see her posting the things she shouldn't post. Never give up on her or him because there may be that one service that they get it. As long as they're coming, there's still breath in their body. As long as they're at that altar praying, there's going to be a chance that one day that they might get it. So never give up on them. They didn't give up on me, and that's why I'm here.
So, speaking of the bus kid and those things, you talked about it a little bit. Tell us a little bit about that now and what you're doing in that ministry.
Yeah, so when we moved here, my husband, we've always worked in bus ministry in McLean and Decatur. We're a big part of our Sunday school department. And when we moved here, my husband's like, he's like, I'm not giving up on it now. So he cast a vision for a bus, and our church family just jumped on it. And so my husband said, he's like, we're going to start this, we're going to push it forward. And it's been beautiful to watch. So now I have my own little route that I do on Sundays, and or actually every service I pick up two special ladies every single service, even for Bible study. And then we have a bus route that goes on Sunday morning. My husband joins me with that, and we pick up others. Our Sunday school department has grown, probably tripled, in the last little bit. I can get direct numbers if I needed to, but it's probably at least tripled. God's just been good. God's been so good to us, and I enjoy it. I love it. I look forward to it. I had this lady that I pick up every time, and she's like, Sister Strain, you don't get sick of coming to get us? And I'm like, no, it's a highlight of my week to see y'all. I'm so thankful. I mean, they're in their 50s and 60s, these ladies, these two ladies that are faithfully riding with me every service. So I enjoy it so much. Yeah.
What did your husband now, but boyfriend at the time, and even best friend, what did his parents say? Like, were they supportive of you and him being
Oh,
together or not?
yes. So, of course, not with me out of church. So, whenever my mom left, so we liked each other when we were like 7, 8 years old, but obviously we were just best friends. When we turned 12 years old, we started looking at each other differently. He knew that I had a bad home life, but he did not know the depths of everything that I had to face when I would go to my dad's. He knew it was just a sinful atmosphere. But I'm telling you, I prayed so hard in those altars, and I would seek God with all of my heart. And I truly did love God. You see those kids in church, and you're like, man, that kid's got an anointing on their life. That was me as a kid. Like, I knew there was a special touch of God in my life. It was there. So, anyways, whenever I was about, I guess that 14 age group, when mom had left, 13, 14, and I wasn't going to church anymore. Obviously, we had to stop talking, our little courtship at a young age. But then whenever I moved back in with the Hickses, well, actually when I moved in with my youth leader, we started talking again. But when I moved back in with the Hickses when I was about 16, that's really whenever we were able to really have a relationship. But my mother-in-law and father-in-law, if they listen to this, they loved me and I loved them so much. They were really he was like a dad to me, and she was like a mom to me, and still is to this day. And I remember when we first got married, I would go out with my mother-in-law, still to this day we will. And people were like, you go out with your mother-in-law? I'm like, yeah, like absolutely. She's amazing. So yeah, mother-in-law and father-in-law were definitely supportive as I got older. Obviously not if I wasn't in church, but yeah.
I love hearing that because, another thing too, I think of so many times is it's not the kid's fault. Like I was raised in a situation and I'm thinking back with myself and with my own daughters, I'm like, would I want a girl that was like me? But then I'm like, but I love the Lord with all of my heart, like I wanted this life more than I wanted anything else. And that's really what matters. It's not so much as how they're raised and what's going on in their home life, but it's in their desires.
As kids grow, they have their choice to make after they turn 18. It's their choice then. And up until I got married, when I got married, then the stability came. Like even living in the Hicks's home, even in all these houses that I was in that give me stability, nothing came like whenever I got married. It was like the seal the deal. This is it. This is my forever home. I never have to worry about anything else ever in my life again. My husband will always take care of me. I truly felt that way, and I feel that way now. It was like, you can't, these young girls who live in these bad home lives, don't count it as right now. What's happening right now? You only have a few more years. There's a little boy in our church, and I'm like, he only has a few more years to go. And I told it's like a grandmother to him. I'm like, look, he only has a few more years and he can make his own decisions. He can come to church when he wants to come to church. You instill love, you love him, you show him that the church is the best thing that's ever happened to him. And I promise you, he'll come back. When he gets older, he will come. So just knowing that, just knowing that hard times as a child, you don't really have much control over it. When you get older, you'll be able to control your life a little bit more, especially when it comes to living for God and going to church.
Everything that you've talked about has been so good just for other people, even older people. you go through situations and with spouses and they're making these decisions and there's nothing you can do to control them. And, just living in uncontrolled atmospheres, like talking about even the youth leader and her husband's out of church and she's in church. It's just not stable on either side, whether a young person or an adult. But just knowing that God, He provides crossroads and He provides opportunities to take care of you.
Every time he'll make a way of escape. That's in his word and it's a promise every time.
So a lot of people talk about, breaking generational curses and that they're like, it stops here and it's not ever going to happen again. As a mom, I'm sure that you have had a lot of those moments.
Yes.
What are some things that you have done and you're like, I know for a fact in this home, it's going to be like this.
Absolutely. Number one, my kids will never ever have to question if I'm going to be there for them or not. I'm going to be there no matter what. They're always going to hear happy birthday. They're always going to hear Merry Christmas. They're always going to have the things. I'm always going to be there to give them a hug and love. My mom was not very affectionate towards me. And like I'm kissing my kids all the time. I wake them up with a kiss. I never scream at them to wake them up. They always get woke up either tickled or rubbed down or something. I'm always mindful of those intimate moments with my babies. And even as simple as not even having food growing up. If my kids say they're hungry, it's like we're gonna find food right now. What you want? And my husband gets tickled at me because sometimes my kids will be like, Mom, I don't want Taco Bell. And one's like, I want Taco Bell or I want McDonald's. And I'm like, okay, we'll go to both. My husband's like, no, you go to one restaurant. But something in me is just like, if my kids are hungry and they want something specific, I'm just, I think it's just my childhood, but just loving them and caring for them and being there for them. And I've told my husband many times, my kids will never experience what I experienced. They'll never ever have to face that. They'll never have to hear the cussing, the drinking, the alcohol, or anything like that, as long as God be my help.
Everything that you have shared has been so good and so touching. Your story is honestly, sounds like something that one person wouldn't have had to endure all of the things that you've had to go through. Like if bits and pieces of it, but it's like, man, this is one person's story. This is all just your life that you've had to endure and the things that you've had to go through. But watching you and seeing you and how that you love God is just proof really that God, He really can. He takes care of us. He can be our mother, our father. He's there. And in every situation, He can change everything. He completely changes your DNA. People talk about that. He changes your heritage and He changes the things about you. And He has.
That's right. And sometimes even to this day, I may not ever understand fully everything that I went through. And sometimes I question more now, even after my father's death and finding out that he wasn't my father, even more than I did my mom's death. Like, I question my life more now, and I'll never understand it. But I see God working through it. Like, I see God helping me. I've been able to speak to so many girls and so many different classes with girls to share my testimony, and they'll all come up to me afterwards and like, you'll look at them and they'll share their testimony and you're like, wow, you would never even see this young little girl have to face what she's had to face. I'm just in awe. I'm just thankful.
Everything's been so good. Thank you for being so open with all of us and sharing your testimony and your story with us. I know that it has encouraged and helped so many. But one thing that we love to do on the Unashamedly You podcast is we leave asking, what is one last thing that you would want to share with the Unashamedly You community today?
I guess I would like to say, no matter what you go through, everyone has a story. Everyone's story is beautiful. You can't change things that's happened in the past, but you can move forward in the future and you can live a bright, glorious life with Christ. And living for God is the best thing that you could ever do for your family and for your future, for your kids and your grandkids.
Thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing everything, like I said, for being open and just sharing all that you have with us. We appreciate it. And thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you so much for listening to another episode on the Unashamedly You podcast. We wanted to remind you that if you listen to an episode that has blessed or helped you, we would love if you would go over to Apple or Spotify and select to leave a review. Every week, so many of you are sending us messages saying how a podcast has blessed or helped you in some way, and you will never know how that encourages me so much and the speakers to keep the podcast going. There is no community like a community of kingdom-minded women running after their calling and purpose. Go be unashamedly you.